Hello, Rightwell colleagues. My name is Amy Knowlton. I'm a senior scientist at the Anderson Cabot Center for Ocean Life at the New England Aquarium, and I'm presenting this work on behalf of my co-authors, Dr. Judd DeCue and Dr. Tim Warner. We have used OrcaFlex software to simulate the performance of lobster fishing gear under different gear configurations to help us understand the Rightwell entanglement situation. The reason why we are doing this study is that we have observed an increase in Rightwell entanglement frequency and severity over time. And these are leading to higher levels of mortality, which cannot be at levels that cannot be sustained by this critically endangered species. We've learned that rope manufacturing changes have resulted in much stronger ropes, especially since the mid-1990s when copolymer fibers were developed. And it's been more than a doubling of rope strength since the 1950s. We know these ropes are too strong for whales to escape, and that was, but the overarching questions are whether fishermen can effectively haul their gear if this rope strength is reduced. If a whale gets entangled in 1,700-pound rope versus full-strength rope, how much reduction in time departing will there be? And are fully formed 1,700-pound ropes better or worse than ropes with weak points integrated? So we teamed up with Judd DeCue, who's an expert in OrcaFlex software, which is an ocean engineering software package used mainly in the offshore oil and gas industry. And this software allows us to measure tensions placed on end lines in lobster gear. In 2018, I presented some work on our initial studies with OrcaFlex, looking at nearshore lobster gear configurations. And we found that loads measured by at-sea testing and OrcaFlex are well below the 1,700 pounds in waters of 300 feet or less without reconfiguration of gear. We also learned that operational changes by fishermen, including adding a ground line extension between the first and second pot to minimize the number of pots in the water column before reaching the stronger ground line, could help reduce tension. And also using a slower hauler speed, especially in higher seas, can also greatly reduce the tension. So based on that work, we felt that 1,700-pound ropes can be used broadly to reduce entanglement risk for large whales, but its use in offshore waters greater than 300 feet is still in question, and we're going to use OrcaFlex to continue those studies to see what changes would need to be made reconfiguring gear to help support using 1,700-pound ropes further offshore. The second question, which is really the focus of this work, the second and third question, is if a whale gets entangled in 1,700-pound rope versus full-strength rope, how much reduction in time to rope parting will there be? To help answer this second question, we analyzed two different lobster pot configurations, inshore and offshore. Inshore had lighter pots, smaller diameter end lines, and shallower water, and offshore heavier pots, larger diameter end lines, and deeper water. Each configuration had 3 lobster pot arrangements of 5, 15, and 40 traps, and the simulated entanglement was conducted at 4 different positions on each end line. And each end line had weak links every 40 feet, or variably placed weak links, or no weak links at all. And every variant was pulled at 4 and 8 knots to mimic potential right whale speeds. A total of 72 simulations were conducted for each gear configuration, 48 with weak links and 24 with no weak links. And the time to reach breakage or maximum tension was measured for all simulations. So the inshore system is depicted here. The end line was 360 feet and water depth 240 feet. And you can see there's a spindle buoy, and all the line parameters are similar to what is used in the industry. And these were pulled along a level sandy seafloor. And this is just depicting the weak links that were embedded in the end lines. Here's an offshore system. Again, the water depth was 656 feet with an end line of 984 feet, and used high flyer buoys and poly buoys similar to what's used in the industry, and bigger pots and longer ground lines. And here's a depiction of the weak links embedded in these end lines. So I'm going to show you here what a simulation looks like. And what you see is the blue line is the pull point, and it is pulled at either 4 or 8 knots. And you can see that the buoy gets pulled underwater, the tension or the scope gets taken out of the end line and starts to pull the traps off the bottom. And the Orcaflex is measuring the tensions at every point along the rope, and then you can look at the data to see how many seconds it takes to reach that threshold, the 1,700-pound threshold, or the maximum tension threshold. So for the 72 simulations that we conducted for the inshore and the offshore gear, we collapsed each configuration into 12 scenarios shown here. And what the red X's show is those cases where the end line did not part. So 4 of the 12 scenarios shown here failed to part, but only one of the 4 had a weak link, and that was the 5 pots towed at 4 knots. What we also show is that of the 3 cases that parted at the stronger rope strength, they were all being pulled at they either were being pulled at higher speeds or had a greater number of pots. This is showing that for the offshore gear, again, there were 5 of 12 scenarios that failed to part, but only one of those 5 had a weak link. And that was the 5 pots towed at 4 knots. And there were 2 cases where the stronger rope did part at 7,950 pounds, and both of these were being pulled at 8 knots. When we look at the ropes that did part that had the weak links, what we found is that the time to part the weak links is faster for inshore gear, faster at higher pull speeds, and faster closest to the seafloor. This last one has to do with the scope being pulled out of the line as when you're higher up in the water column. It takes more time to get the scope out of the line and reach that 1,700-pound tension. The next question, are fully formed 1,700-pound ropes better or worse than ropes with weak points integrated? So the simulations indicate that the highest tensions were just below the impact point, or the pull point, and that the line above the impact point would not part, even when the buoys were pulled subsurface. But multiple weak links in the line would provide predictable parting close to the whale. And with fully formed 1,700-pound ropes, it would be less certain that the line would part close to the impact point. The weakest point might be further away from the impact point. So by having the line part closer to the whale, our speculation is that if you have a shorter rope on one side and then the buoy and the longer rope pulling on the other side, it might pull that rope through the mouth, and it would ideally result in a less complex entanglement. So to summarize our findings, when inshore and offshore scenarios were combined, with weak links, 2 of the 12 scenarios, or 17%, failed to reach the 1,700-pound breaking strength, and that was the 5-pot trawl pulled at 4 knots. With no weak links, 7 of the 12 scenarios, or 58%, failed to reach the standard rope breaking strength of either 3,720 pounds for inshore gear or 7,950 pounds for offshore gear. When we looked at the time to part the line with weak links integrated every 40 feet for inshore gear, it was 5 to 42 seconds, and offshore was 10 to 72 seconds. When for the time to line parting with no weak links, but at the higher breaking strengths, which occurred in 5 of 12 scenarios, for inshore, we had 12 to 94 seconds, and offshore was 35 to 88 seconds. So you can see it's a bit higher timing than the inshore, or than the rope with weak links. The highest tensions were just below the impact point, indicating that more weak links would ensure parting closer to the whale, and that the higher the number of pots and the greater the pull speed, the more quickly the gear parted. So our findings suggest that the use of 1,700-pound weak-linked ropes would substantially reduce the time a whale is involved in entangling gear, could also reduce the amount of trailing line on that whale, and in turn, this could reduce the severity and complexity of the entanglement. If all entanglement interaction impacts could be reduced to minor injuries, as pictured here, we could certainly help this species recover. So we'd like to thank our funders, the Bycatch Reduction Engineering Program and the Volgenau Foundation. Also thanks to the South Shore Lobster Fishermen's Association and scientists with the Maine DMR for input on gear, parameters, and load cell data points used to help inform the model. Thank you very much.